climate, energy, EPA, and NOAA.
Say that 3 times fast.
I don't think I can. How about in honor of that, I'll do the first part and you do the second part.
Hard.
All right. So basically, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, it did a whole bunch of stuff to make our country gear itself into clean energy. Okay. Because a whole bunch of countries are in competition right now in order to be the clean energy place of the future, or to kind of come up with all of the inventions for clean energy to switch over as fast as possible. We wanted to be a part of that. In fact, we wanted to win that race. This takes a lot of that away. So first, what it does do, it makes it easier to get permitting and leasing contracts for coal, oil, and natural gas. It also makes it easier to build oil and gas pipelines. However, it takes back a whole bunch of money from the IRA. In fact, most of the IRA stuff it gets rid of. So let's talk about it. It takes back money not yet used for energy projects in the IRA. It removes caps on mercury and greenhouse emissions. It repeals clean energy initiatives. So for example, you could get tax credits for solar panels, for wind, for batteries. You could even get tax credits for buying an electric car. And now you can't. With this bill, you can't. And this is both on the House side and the Senate side. It also gets rid of emission regulations.
They really were like climate change, everything. We pressed Control F to find everything that said climate, and we erased it all.
Yes. And it, of course, also eliminates incentives available to update to more efficient appliances. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what this does is it switches from incentivizing clean energy economy to kind of get at the forefront of that back to fossil fuel dependence. And it's going to cost us. In fact, it's estimated to cost us 830,000 clean energy jobs, most of them in red states. It's also going to result in higher energy costs. If we can't get more efficient appliances with these tax credits, then our homes are going to be spending more energy or using more energy. On average, it could increase energy rates by about $230 per household per year. It's going to slow the transition to renewables. And remember how we said there's a race. It's going to allow other countries to get ahead. And of course, it's
China
also
will love that.
They will. And it's going to make pollution worse.
All right, I'm going to talk about the cuts to the EPA and to the NOAA. This bill eliminates EPA grants from the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. And the IRA funded replacing high emission heavy vehicles with zero emission ones, reducing air pollution and ports, funding private investment in clean energy in disadvantaged communities, and monitoring and reducing air pollution in cities and low-income schools. There is approximately $100 billion with a B in EPA cuts over the next 10 years. And let's talk about NOAA, that pretty blue box.
Did I mention we're in Florida?
We are in one of the coastal communities that will be impacted by this.
Didn't we have 3 last year, or was it 4?
I lost count. Each one, I was like, am I dying today? How many cases of toilet paper did I purchase? How many gallons of water? How many cans of SpaghettiOs can one person eat and then survive?
How many trees are going to fall down for this one?
I just cut them all and was like, the homeowners association can come after me later.
How many tree limbs are going to be picked up before the next one?
Listen, I told my children it was werewolves outside instead of a natural disaster, so they panicked less. Because they still think that werewolves look like Jacob from Twilight.
I thought they'd like it then.
Yeah. Okay. So this bill rescinds unused money from the IRA dedicated to NOAA, which funded extreme storm preparedness. So those hurricanes. It cuts an estimated $1.5 billion, again with the B, from hurricane warning systems, climate research, and coastal resilience. Experts warn that this could weaken the country's ability to respond to extreme weather events. So what does this mean? This means that there is less staff dedicated or available to be dedicated to researching the pattern of major storms, where they're going, where they're heading, how strong they are. And that's really scary because if you live in Florida and you have seen some of these hurricanes, not knowing when or where or how strong they are, it's a terrifying thing to not know how prepared you need to be, or if you need to get the heck out of Dodge. All right, so